I call this meeting to order. This is a special meeting of the Northfield Public School Board. Today is Monday, August 1st, 2022, and the time is 6 p.m. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The recording of this meeting will be posted on the district website as soon as possible. As this is a special meeting, we will not have public comment. Stakeholders can reach us via email. Thank you to those of you who are present today watching and also watching on live stream. This is an important topic, and we thank you for taking the time to be here live or online. This special meeting is for the purpose of discussing one topic, the Northfield High School Facility Plan, which includes academic, athletic, and music spaces. Dr. Hillman has provided the board with a document in the packet titled Northfield High School Facility Plan Pathways. I'll ask Dr. Hillman to walk us through the document and also give the board a summary of the meeting he and I had with the mayor and the city manager on Friday concerning the council's recent resolution. And then tonight, Dr. Hillman will also help facilitate our discussion. Board members, as this is not a work session, please wait to be called on. Take your time making your comments, but do consider that others are also waiting to speak. And as usual, I encourage you to use the most constructive vocal and body language to maximize our discussion. Okay, thank you, Dr. Hillman. Please share.
Yes, well, good evening, everyone. And I also wanted to just point out that we also have Sal Bagley here from Wold Architects and Engineers, Cole Nelson, our Director of Buildings and Grounds, and of course, Val Murdestorff, Director of Finance, is also here to help with any questions or discussion items that the board might have. I am going to take just a little bit of time to walk through the document that I've put together for you. As always, I'm incredibly proud to serve this board. You have really worked incredibly hard over the last couple of months to wrestle with a very difficult question, which is what is the right facility plan for the high school moving forward? How far do we go in terms of its renovation or addition, or what kind of additional expansion might we need to do to serve other components that are important to the student experience, like athletics and music? I also appreciate and value the struggle that people have gone through, the productive struggle to think about what is the right timing. And so we've tried to allow that to come together organically. And I'm always so proud of how this board builds consensus. And I think we're all struggling that we haven't gotten to a consensus yet. And that's okay. I think that tells us a lot. You are representative of the community. And I think your comments and your perspectives are representing the community. This is a difficult discussion because there are so many components to it. So what I want to do is I just want to do a very brief review of what we've done so far. I'm going to share a little bit of information about the expiration of the district's previous debt, which is an important component for you to consider. I'm going to talk about the pathways forward, and we're going to directly address briefly address the resolution that the city of Northfield took regarding partnership in an ice arena. And I'm going to share a few items that I have with you about some practical parts of a dilemma that we face when it comes to ice in Northfield. And so I just want to make sure that it's on the table. Then, as Claudia said, I'll briefly summarize the meeting that we had with the city. I'll walk through the three potential pathways, and I am making a recommendation to you tonight. We don't have an item for individual action on the agenda, but I just wanted to share that this is the pathway that we're going down tonight. So to begin with, just again, we want to thank Sal Bagley and Caitlin Chambers and the team from Wold Architects and Engineers. They have been not just good, not just great, but they've been stellar partners. They are truth tellers, they are honest, and they're master facilitators. And so they started with doing a comprehensive facility assessment with Cole Nelson and his team at Northfield High School between November of 2021 and January of 2022. Wold Architects and Engineers came back and conducted 13 listening sessions with a variety of stakeholder groups in February. And then the district hosted a high school facility task force that Sal and her team helped us facilitate. That task force did include over 30 students, staff, parents, and community members. That task force met 4 times in March and April. And the high school task force was charged with creating recommendations to accommodate educational needs, enrollment in programs over the next 20 years that were fiscally or financially sustainable. That was the charge statement. And to be very transparent, we did give that group the parameters of really focusing on the existing facility. So I just want to be very clear about that. You received this task force report in June. And as I mentioned, we have really worked hard grapple with it over 2 work sessions and 2 regular meetings. So as we move into the next part of the discussion, I want to be really clear about where we stand in regards to the amount of debt that we have that expires. And so approximately $40 million of the district's existing debt will expire in the pay 2024 year. Now, being a veteran board, you know that when we put the word pay in front of a year, that means something different than a calendar year. So when we think about that pay 2024 tax year, what will happen is around $40 million of debt, basically for several projects that were approved by the voters before the 2018 bond referendum, will fall off the books. So what that means is I can't tell you what facility is. The reason I can't tell you what facility is that we are good stewards of our taxpayers' dollars, and we have refinanced that debt so many times that we can't tell you exactly what is part of that debt necessarily anymore. It would certainly include some of the middle school. It would include some of Bridgewater and some other smaller projects that had been approved along the way. So $40 million comes off the books for pay 2024, which means that any new bonding, the first $40 million of any new bonding would be tax neutral, and I put that in quotes, if passed before January of 2024. So while the debt's paid off in 2024, it's the taxes that are collected in 2023 that are used to make the final payment on those bonds. And again, with the community, we prize communication and transparent communication. And while we're saying that the first $40 million would be tax neutral, we also have to say that if we didn't bring something to the community, or that we did bring something to the community and they didn't pass it, their taxes would go down then as a result. So we just want to be straight up about that we know what we're working off of. So that's an important part of your discussion, because that does change the new tax impact for any question that would come to the voters. So there are obviously tons of permutations of how we could address the Northfield High School facility issue. So I'm highlighting 3 potential pathways forward with some estimated costs. And I want to just take a moment before I go into those, talking about the city of Northfield's recent formal request to include an ice arena as part of the facility plan. And it was a resolution. And as a resolution, you know, when we take resolutions, they are very formal and they are very legalistic in nature. And Claudia and I met with City Administrator Ben Marting and Mayor Pownell on Friday to really talk through the resolution. They shared that their intent of that resolution was really to be a partnership, and they apologized to the district because of the legalistic tone that a resolution provides. And we had explained that reading the resolution did not feel as if it was the act of a partner. It felt more directive in nature. And if you read, and that's what resolutions do, it is just a difference of how our 2 governance structures work. And the mayor and the city administrator assured us that the intent of that resolution was to really formalize a partnership about trying to solve this dilemma that the ice arena question presents to our community. So we wanted to report that to you, that we felt we had a very productive meeting. We have felt that we were able to be honest about how each other felt. And some of it is just some of it was just a misunderstanding of the governance structure that our 2 bodies use and the tools that we use to communicate. So I want to just pause for a moment and ask Claudia, do you have any other comments about that meeting that you want to share?
Just that their sincerity did come through in wanting to partner. You know, they talked about how much they value the school district, how much they see a city's attractiveness tied to a school district, and how much they, you know, support our endeavor to update. So that really came through. Just they are sincere in wanting a partnership.
And again, I think that we all know that the impetus for the sense of urgency is the expansion of Aurora Pharmaceuticals business here in Northfield. And that's wonderful. We have long at this table wanted a deeper tax base. We've talked about having a deeper tax base in which to spread the tax impact out across in our district. And so we are, of course, thrilled that Aurora Pharmaceuticals is expanding. That's a great thing. It's a high-tech kind of industry that we've really wanted moving forward. And so the question that I just want, or the comment that I want to put with you about this is, I've shared many times publicly, it would be highly unusual. It is highly unusual currently for a school district to own and operate an ice arena in Minnesota. There are some examples of it, but it is highly unusual. Now, at the same time, I want to be very straightforward with you about concerns that I have about the worst case scenario. One of my jobs is to think about the worst case scenario and try to put us in a position where we could rise to meet that moment. So we do have to consider the hypothetical that we no longer have ice in Northfield. I would fully expect that the city of Northfield will sell that property to Aurora Pharmaceuticals. It's an expanding business, high tech, all of the things that we've talked about. And if for whatever reason we do not have access to an ice arena in Northfield, what concerns me is that hockey is a sport that we use that facility for, which is a very passionate group of players and parents. And we have probably roughly 80 or so high school students who do play hockey in this district. And so I'm just talking about the high school students right now. I'm not talking about, you know, the scores of other youth hockey players who also are in our district. I do have a concern that if we were to lose ice through whatever methodology that were to happen, that those families would take their children to other districts. There's a lot of time involved in hockey. There's a lot of travel already involved. And I do have a serious concern that if we were to lose ice in the community, we would, even if we lost half of those students to a neighboring district, you know how to do the math. And we have talked with you a number of times about our enrollment concerns, of which, you know, we have done the best that we can. We, as the city said, we have a stellar reputation. People want to send their children to the school district. We have two issues. We have a lower birth rate and we have very limited housing potential right now. I just got my update from Pete Mergens, who's a local realtor at Crazy Days. As of last Thursday, there were only 32 homes for sale in the entire school district. Over half of them are listed at $500,000 or more. So to have people move into the system, there's limited ways where they could do that. And then if we were to have this worst case scenario where we were to lose the ability to have ice in the community, I do have a concern that we would lose a substantial number of families, exacerbating our enrollment issue. I'm not saying that that should be the only consideration, but I think one of my jobs with you is to make sure that you know what the operational issues are of decision-making as well. So I am certainly not advocating or saying that it should be part of any consideration. I'm saying as we look forward to this, I think you do need to think about this resolution that the city has taken. And we need to think about how are we able to help solve, we have an interest in the problem being solved, especially as a current tenant of the facility. I'm not saying we're the people who have to solve it, but I do think that we should be part of the discussion of how it could get solved. And it could involve a number of different ways that could come to fruition. So I wanted to get that out of the way up front. I do thank the mayor and the city administrator, Mr. Mardig, for reaching out and scheduling the meeting with us. I do think it was a very productive meeting. We appreciate their desire to collaborate. It's a complex question. And so we wanted to share with the board their intentions and make it very clear that their intent, stated intent, which we found to be sincere, is to work on a problem that faces the whole community collaboratively. So with that said, I'm going to move forward to the three potential pathways that we would have, which the ice arena is not included in any of these three pathways at this point, because that was not something to this point that we've heard as a substantial priority from the board. So pathway number one, we call it renew, renovate, and reinvest. This is really the most similar to what we have heard from Sal and from Cole and from Val about the priorities for renovation and addition that the task force had prioritized. And so I'm not saying that they recommend what they prioritized. And so in this case, there could be a couple of potential questions for voter consideration, but there might not be. You could, it's almost an a la carte menu, if you would. So it would make sense to consider something of up to about $40 million of that expiring debt for things like HVAC systems, which would be things like windows and lighting. and other infrastructure kinds of things that would most likely not be noticed, frankly, by a lot of people on a day-to-day basis. They'd be the things that would be behind the scenes, but could have a potential significant improvement in the comfort and the operation of the facility and the operational efficiency. A $40 million bond also could include some classroom and laboratory improvements for things like science, technology, and engineering, family and consumer science, and the potential of agricultural education, as we've discussed, could be in our future. Really think of that as the CTE upgrades, the career technical education updates. And then furniture. One of the things that we have learned through the process that with the elementary schools is the power that furniture and modern furniture plays in the instructional process. And so part of that $40 million could be those kinds of items. You could also consider an additional $20 million question that would do some additional updates to the academic and other spaces of the school. It could be about creating some more flexible learning spaces within the facility. Sal has shown us some examples of how in some schools they will strategically remove a classroom that's at the end of a hallway to create that open field that we have developed at some of our other buildings. Think about outside the classrooms at the middle school. Think about outside the classrooms at Greenville Park, at the end of the hallways at Bridgewater, that flexible collaborative space that we know is really used well in instruction. And we've tried to do some of that on our own by removing lockers and putting benches in, but it still is not exactly the same of what we would really ideally have. We'd improve special education classrooms, you'd improve music classrooms, and that part of the bond would also potentially include the updating of the auditorium and the locker rooms. And then finally, a third question could be up to $20 million for athletic and activity space expansion. I am suggesting if you were to go down that road at some point that we consider what would making the questions contingent upon each other. So for example, for question 2 to pass, question 1 would have to pass. For question 3 to pass, question 2 would have to pass. It's very common strategy to make bond questions contingent upon each other. I want to point out that those updates could include a field house. It could include synthetic turf or Memorial Field. And remember, the moment that we add on to the structure, we have to include a storm shelter. So that's a key thing for your consideration. That pathway is what I would call pathway number 1. I've given it the name renew, renovate, reinvest. And that is really closest to what you talked about mostly. Pathway 2, we're giving it the name renew, reinvest, and reimagine. And in this case, what we would look at potentially considering would be this hybrid option that had been most recently discussed. And frankly, it was also discussed by the task force in terms of thinking about more new space, still leveraging some of the high impact areas of the current building, but building additional academic space. And in this concept, it would be something around a multi-story, probably 2 or 3 levels of academic spaces. So newer instructional spaces, some demolition of some things like potentially like some of the oldest parts of the building, like the H-wing and some of those things, potentially including a new cafeteria or common space. And then again, leveraging things like the existing gymnasium, the existing auditorium. In this case, the new office upgrade that is happening this summer, that would continue to stay. There'd be no work done. That would be worked into that kind of reimagination. So it would include that construction of some new academic spaces and a cafeteria. It could include demolition of several of the oldest academic wings to preserve some space on campus. We'd have some infrastructure maintenance in parts of the existing building that remain, because obviously, if you are going to demolish, if you were to think about demolishing portions of the building, you obviously don't need to do the maintenance update on those. So that changes what kind of maintenance you would need to do. And of course, because we do new construction there, that would have to be a storm shelter. And so these are some of the latest numbers that Sal has provided us around that kind of concept. And then again, the second question in that case could be pieces around activity and athletic space expansion, similar to what we talked about in the first question. The third pathway, which is my recommendation, I'm calling it pumping the brakes. And so we actually call it continue planning, renew, and expand the capital projects levy. And so as I've thought about the questions that you've wrestled with over the last 6 weeks, here's what I've really heard you discussing. What's the right plan to support high school students by addressing the building's needs? You've talked about that a lot. How much of an investment will taxpayers support? That is part of our responsibility. Part of our responsibility is to be good stewards and to understand that what kind of investment do we think our taxpayers, the people who pay the bills, support. You've talked about that quite a bit. And finally, you've talked about when would the right time to bring a bond election to the voters. And this is not clear. We're getting mixed signals, right, from all sorts of analysts. We hear about a negative growth in GDP for a number of quarters in a row recently. While at the same time, we've also heard that just recently, the state of Minnesota's bond rating was upgraded to a AAA. And you all know my affection for bond ratings, right? And that they are a good indicator of an organization's fiscal health. We also see the lowest unemployment rate ever recorded of any state ever at 1.8%. But it is not a consistent message, and we are living right now in volatile times. And so being thoughtful about when we go to the voters is very important. I've heard you wrestle with those three questions. As I shared before, I'm very proud of your work to try to find consensus. And I want to tell you, it is okay. It's completely fine that we are not there yet because these are hard questions. And the urgency that we have for this timeline for a November ballot initiative is self-imposed. We wanted to give you a pathway if there was consensus. But I'm recommending that we relieve that pressure and that we do not worry about going to the voters for this bond in November. We do have 5 opportunities by law each year for the board to bring a bond question to the taxpayers or to the voters. It's in February, April, May, August, and November. That's state law. We're allowed to bring a bond question 5 different times during the calendar year. We are only allowed to bring operating levies on November election day. Now, I want to be very clear that we know that the history of this community has been to hold these elections on a November ballot. And I would only suggest thinking about another date so we can have the best opportunity to take advantage of that debt that is expiring. And I do think that things have changed in the calculus of that. When we're talking about other kinds of elections in the past or off November elections, the ability to communicate was different. We now do have the ability to truly get a message out in a variety of different ways. We know that we are able to do that. If you were to choose a different date other than November, I can assure you, and I can assure the community, we would leave no stone unturned to the point where people would be sick of us telling them that there's a bond election coming up. So we pledge that to you. Excuse me. So what we suggest that you consider is that we do have in the packet, I did give you timelines for each of the potential election options. So if we were to press the pause button, excuse me, and we were to just, again, continue planning, here's what the administration would do to help you. We would consider contracting for a paid, randomized, stratified sample survey of district voters to judge their tax impact tolerance. We are good with a lot of different survey tools. This is not a regular survey. This is an election poll. And so it requires a different approach. The cost for that survey would be $24,800. We would contract with Morris Leatherman, who is a well-known firm in the state. And in our discussion with the city on Friday, they gave us a strong indication that they would help us with that, the paying for that survey. So we felt that that was one of the reasons that they felt very sincere. We would conduct a community feedback process. That would be a good old-fashioned survey, simply to solicit the questions from the voters about the proposed projects. So we wouldn't ask them in a regular survey, would you support this? If this, we would do that through that randomized stratified sample. But we would use a community feedback process to get what are people's questions. That's very helpful. We would also, and we are going to do this anyway, we're going to conduct a focus group in the fall about what should career technical education look like at Northfield High School. That could drive what kind of spaces we propose moving forward, because we have to have that conversation anyway. We're going to have it regardless of this or not. Finally, it would also give us an opportunity to collaborate with other governmental agencies and business partners to determine if there was a way forward to have a public-private financial partnership in terms of things like the athletics portion of the plan. So if we think about the athletics portion of a plan, are there businesses or other community groups that would be willing to privately help fundraise to bring the cost of that facility down for the taxpayers. So, if we were to think about that, that's what we would do if you quote unquote pump the brakes a little bit. The next part of this is that we have another ballot question that is going to be coming up fairly soon, which is the renewal of the $750,000 capital projects levy. That expires in 2024. Correct? Excuse me. Talking too much. So one concept that we could use would be to, if we had gone for a bond in this year, we would have had to have come back with a capital projects levy at some point in the near future. So something we'd like you to consider if we pump the brakes on the bond portion is that you could authorize us to go in November 22 to renew the capital projects levy, and then potentially to expand it as we discussed during the budget adjustment process. By way of example, if we doubled the capital projects levy, that would equate to $61 additional taxes per year for a home of $300,000. And as you know, we could use the expansion of the capital projects levy to provide some general fund relief by paying for all of our technology technicians, which we don't have a ton of them, right? But we have 6 FTE that we could pay for all of those salaries from the capital projects levy. That would give us around $600,000 of general fund relief approximately. So that would, because the state has continued to let us down on trying to help us close the special education cross subsidy for providing us sustainable funding, we have to take responsibility for that again. And this is the only way that we have left to be able to do that. A benefit of that is that as we were doing a campaign for capital projects levy renewal and expansion, we could also use it as a prelude to what we might bring forward in terms of a high school bond. So it could be an opportunity for us before an election, specifically for the bond, to teach the public about it. So my recommendation to you is that you've done a great job. You have been great representatives of this community, but these are difficult questions. And so we are not at consensus. And what we know is that if we don't have consensus on the board, the issue is that the chances of passing a bond referendum when you don't have consensus drops significantly. It's not that anybody did anything wrong, it's just the statistics. And so we'd rather take a little bit more time, make sure that we get the plan right, make sure that we get the timing right, and that it's something that the board could move forward with comfortably. So we will deliver on what you ask us to do. Your administration will deliver on whatever you ask us to do to the best of our ability. But we think that this is the right recommendation at this time to give you some additional time for discussion. We have an alternate way in terms of we do have to renew the capital projects levy, whether that's now or next year. It is something that we do need to renew, and we do think it's responsible for us to ask for an expansion of it. That gives us a little bit more time to outline those items that we did that we said we would do. It gives you a little bit more time to think about some of these bigger questions, and then we can come back. The earliest we would come back, and I would suggest that you strongly think about a February 2023 election. I understand that that's very close after the November date. You could certainly pick any of the other dates if you were to so choose. The key thing is that we do want to make sure that we have the opportunity to bring something to the voters to update that building prior to the end of 2023, so we can potentially take advantage of that expiring debt. So I thank everyone for listening. I hope that I have captured your work effectively. I am not normally someone who I would be like, I want to give you a strong recommendation, which I feel this is. I think this is the most responsible pathway forward at this time. So there you have it.
Thank you so much. Okay, so there is a recommendation, and we would open the floor now for anybody to give their comments or questions. Sal is here, Val, Dr. Hillman, and Cole, of course. Okay, Amy.
Dr. Hillman, I just want to hear more about the capital projects levy. Is it a 10-year levy? And if we had them vote on it this year, but it wouldn't start to 2024, does that mean we get 10 years past when it would expire? Just if you could cover those types of details.
So you're going to give me a little quiz here, and Val Murdesdorf is going to tell me if I'm right or not, which So the maximum length of a capital projects levy is 10 years. And in this case, it is not, it would extend it from the end of the existing levy. So when the levy exists in 2024, the 10 years would begin from the end of that point. That's what happened in 2011. In 2011, we passed it, but it didn't expire until 2014, which is why we have the expansion until 2024.
Is there an inflationary factor or anything like that?
I'm going to have Val talk about that. It's a complicated calculation.
So the capital projects levy is a percentage of your tax capacity. And so if we are going to generate, I'm just going to use $1.5 million, because that's one of the numbers on here as the example. It's actually calculated as, 1.374% of the estimated tax capacity of that year. And that is what the voters approve, is 1.374% of the tax capacity. And so that number is locked in. So we told the voters in 2011 that we would do 750,000, but we actually have closer to 900,000 because of the tax growth we've seen, but we under levy because we told the voters 750,000. So depending on how you choose to frame it, if we said it's going to be 1.5 million and that's it, we would levy exactly 1.5 million. Otherwise, we will get the growth of the tax base on it. So it's not an inflationary factor per se. It could go up and down depending on the tax base, but historically the tax capacity has increased every year.
Do you have a recommendation?
I would strongly encourage not to limit the dollar amount to allow for the growth. Because we know that we experience inflation, and if we're talking about salaries, we're going to offer employment increases to remain competitive, and that allows that funding source to grow with that.
Okay, good. Any other questions or comments? Julie?
I have a question about the capital projects levy. So, as I understand it, the recommendation is $1.5 million, but I see that is there an option for more? And how did you determine the 1.5 million as the recommendation?
Dr. Helming talked about how the recommendation came about. The amounts that are shown were just different points that we talked about as an avenue to support different long-term strategies for funding any kind of projects. So we don't have to exclusively use it for technology salaries. It can be to support our operating capital budget and those sorts of things as well, which are tied to enrollment. But the 1.5 million was really doubling. So we currently have 750. The additional salaries would be about 600,000. And so to keep numbers even, which I like, we rounded to $1.5 million. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think it's a fair assessment. In addition, remember what our operating capital budget can support. It can support things like updates to facilities, smaller projects that we do every year that Cole and his team put together. It also can support the purchase of equipment, whether that be, for example, Cole just got back from, I think it was Illinois or Indiana, where he found a new truck or a used truck for the district that we purchased those things out of capital to replace an aged vehicle. It can also be used for things like curricular purchases and updates. And so we know when we are updating our curriculum. So for example, when we updated our reading curriculum several years ago, that can come from operating capital. We're updating our science curriculum this coming year. That kind of thing comes from operating capital. And to have those kinds of things on a cycle, having that additional margin within the capital projects levy would allow us to continue those kinds of things. So yes, it was a doubling of it, $600,000 of it being roughly $600,000 being salary, and then creating a little bit more margin for some of those other projects to make sure that we take care of our facilities, to make sure that we keep updating our curriculum, and that we can have equipment that helps students be ready for the workforce.
Absolutely makes sense. So what I'm wondering is if we don't ask the voters for in November and we wait till February, I know that the high school has some immediate maintenance needs. Would we have the ability to address those if we aren't able to get, if we don't pass something in November and yet we have $18 million in maintenance in the next 0 to 2 years at the high school? How would we look to address that if we have a situation where something is got to be repaired?
So I would say we do reserve the LTFM fund balance for anything that would be emergency in nature. That's one of the strategies that we have for that. Certainly if it's millions of dollars, that's a different conversation, but we do have at least 600,000 typically in that fund at a minimum. The capital projects levy, just so everybody is clear and on the same timeline. It expires in fiscal 24, which is pay 23. So pay 23 is the levy that we are starting right now. So if we do not ask for any capital projects right now, we will not have that revenue for 24. Because we would have to wait a year for the levy. So I just want to be super clear that would be this year, or we would have a gap year basically until we would ask for that. So in terms of the high school, we have the 750 and that's already budgeted. And so the increase would not come until July 1, basically of the next year. And we could certainly choose to use it for that rather than salaries if there were some really pressing needs. We could truthfully look at further LTFM bonds if we really felt that there was a pressing need that was not going to be met by the process that we're going through now. So there are some options, but we would ideally like to have a collective package that would address what we're looking to address. Just financially, it would be in our best interest because we'll already have people on site working and all of those things. So that's kind of my thoughts on your question. Hopefully it answered what you were looking
Great,
for.
thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
Yeah, do you have examples of other schools in our district of what their capital levies are? I mean, just so by comparison, because it.
You're talking about other school districts, Jeff?
Yes.
I do have a list of all of them. I'm not sure when it was last updated. I got it probably a year ago from Ellers. Let me just pull that up again.
And again, we did include in your packet the potential tax impact of a variety of different increases to the capital projects levy. And as board members remember, we did talk about that as part of the budget adjustment process as one of the options to be able to help us with the general fund budget issue.
So are you looking for districts around us or?
Well, I just think, comparison 101. I mean, what are
Just
other
in
districts
general?
doing? I mean, where are we at for what is our, I mean, that 750 number means nothing to me and or the 1.5 unless I can compare it and see what.
Well,
other
I
school
would.
Districts are doing.
I would say that this is similar to every other bond for districts where it is less expensive for their taxpayers, they can do more. And that's a known in the state of Minnesota with the way that our taxes work. So for instance, Wayzata has 2 separate capital projects levies totaling almost $9 million.
Wayzata is one of the richest school districts in the states. I mean, I'm just talking about out of the 12 that we have in our conference. I mean, school districts that we compare ourselves to. Certainly not Wayzata.
So there are, according to this list, which was on the pay 22 levy, 60 districts or 60 capital projects levies, like Wayzata's on here twice. And the average dollar amount is about 2.3 million.
You have a tax capacity percentage?
The tax rate is, I truthfully don't know if that's comparable because of the way it's calculated. Because the 1.34% is what generates $1.5 million on our tax capacity. So I'm not sure that that would be a good comparison. I can certainly ask Ellers about that, but I'm not 100% sure about that one. So I don't want to give any data that is incorrect.
Jeff, do you have a follow-up? You're good.
Yeah, I would like to see much more comparison and data on that to make any kind of a real decision personally, but.
Thank you. Tom?
Sorry, a question for Cole. If we did have, well, not if, is there any way to know or predict or do you have any gut feeling of what might fail in the next couple of years and how much that might cost? I mean, no, you can't say, but if a boiler went out, say, or versus just some of all the maintenance that we were talking about, are there some high cost items in that, or is mostly it just a bunch of items that total come up?
I would say, I mean, the whole full study that we partaked with Walden would be a pretty good kind of analysis of that per se. There's quite a bit of the mechanical equipment that was replaced in 04, I believe it was. Boilers were included in that and stuff like that. There's also some air handler units and stuff in the older part that are in the 60s. So that would be kind of the higher priority. I don't have any, as I've talked to Matt, I don't have any emergency, like we have to move immediately, but there's definitely some of that stuff that I have some concerns about just how long it will last, because I don't want to get to the day where we can't repair something or fix it. We have a very talented staff that keep things running very well. So I don't have any immediate concerns or know of anything that would come in the next year on the pipe. So
All right.
does that help you?
Thank you.
Yep.
And then I had a question on the stratified sample survey that the city's going to potentially help pay for. Would they have questions related to city functions then also as part of that? And would the survey be sort of, well, we're just going to ask you how much money you're willing to pay, and I can tell you the answer to that right now and save you $24,000. But is there any like backstory that would go with it?
Yes, so we would work to develop the questions. We would use the expertise of Don Lifto, who's now doing this work for Morris Leatherman. Don Lifto has done a tremendous amount of these surveys across the state over time. Peter Leatherman is very confident. There were some questions about, well, can you really get a randomized stratified sample anymore? People don't answer their phones anymore. And when I talked with Peter, he said, Matt, 100% confidence that I can get you the appropriate sample. And what he shared was it's not a cold call, right? They will call, they will work with people to set up a time. And he said that people are incredibly receptive to giving their opinion about local government issues. When they move to state or federal issues, that's when people don't want to talk to them. So I just want to clear that up too, that Morris Leatherman is very confident they could deliver on giving us the representative sample. And then they do an extensive amount of testing on those questions. It isn't just about how much will you pay. It does give some of the why behind what you would pay. We've not predetermined those questions at that point because we do want to leverage the expertise of a firm like Morris Leatherman. So we would ask them, what are the kinds of, we would give them what we're looking for. They would help propose questions. We would work with them on that. Right now, what it would be is really, it's about the facilities for the school district. It could include some discussion about some facilities that the city currently owns. It could be around expansion of some other community resources like ball fields and other things that, so it would go down that road. It wouldn't be necessarily city issues. It would be things where there were some shared interest.
Amy.
I actually am curious about the survey as well. My first question is, how many people live in our school district? And how many, if you know how many voters that would be? And then also, what percentage of them makes a representative sample? And I'm also curious about the process. They call and make an interview, so then it's a phone interview with everybody. And
Yeah, so I don't have I'm not going to estimate the number of people in the district because that can change. So I'm looking to see if we don't have, we will have that for you the next time. And I don't know what that representative sample, that number is. I'm going to have a conversation with them again this week. Had a brief conversation with them last week, so I can give you that data as we come forward. And then I think the part is, you're right, they do conduct these via phone. I think they can also take it in some other methodologies, but they are very confident that they are able to get the representative sample for us. So I apologize that we don't have the latest number on the number of voters in the district and or what would be a representative sample. should have
I
had
kind of
that
threw
for you
those
tonight.
at you at the last minute.
Oh, but we
but-
should have anticipated that question.
But then my question is, with that, how long can the survey be?
Sal has done a few of these.
I was going to say I work with Peter Leatherman regularly, and he does a great job explaining of how for a district of your size, I think 400 would be the representative sample that he would get to be statistically significant, to get within a 5% margin of error either way. I've done surveys with districts of very similar size, and that's what always been the number. It's never 500 or 300, it's always 400. And I don't think that changes much with the number of registered voters and number of people in the city, because it really comes down to just the science of the probability of likelihood. And they actually might talk to more people than the 400, but then they work to make that 400 as close to the number or the types of voters that you have, and the demographics of the people who typically show out for your elections. And so there's some correcting. So they might talk to more people than 400, but then they work to make those 400 as similar to the types of people you can expect to come to an election. And they would go through all of that in their survey response to you, of how many, in your demographic of 51 to 59 overrepresents, and your demographic of 21 to 29 underrep, so they would go through all of that with you, but that would be my best guess.
Thank you, Sal. We
Yep,
appreciate
and I'm
your
not Peter, but
expertise there. No, but we know that
that's what I think. I had to look it up, but that's what I think he would say.
Thank you.
And
And the length of survey.
yeah, it's just-
I think you start paying for length as it starts increasing the amount of time that they spend on the phone. And that's actually the most of the cost of the survey is the phone calling time. And I think there is a limit to people's patience as well, of how long they will stay on the phone. So I know they try to keep it to 20 minutes or less, which is a long phone call with a stranger. And so I often see them I don't think I've ever seen a Peter Leatherman survey longer than 60 questions. And sometimes those questions are in quick succession, like they might ask about elements of a plan that's a field house and a pool and a science edition and a main office. And each one of those technically counts as a different question, because you might get a different response. But then some questions are quite lengthy. So I'm trying to think of the shortest one, maybe 35 questions. There's quite a few atmospheric questions at the beginning about general trust and belief in the school district. And then we really get to the plan and then the testing of tax tolerance. So I would guess it would be in that range.
And that includes demographic questions then as well?
Correct. Yep. And I'm sure you could get a sample survey for the board to review before it went out. Yep. You probably could ask for a longer survey. I just don't know if you would have people stay on the phone.
And Sal, I think it's also while you're at the mic, I
Yeah.
think these companies are very good at this. And so we have a history of the surveys that they've conducted
Mhm.
and how close they get. And it's uncanny. I mean, it really is uncanny how close they come to the results. A district could have something unique that happens within the community between the time the survey is conducted and the time the election happens, something that just wasn't anticipated. But the results are really amazing. And the reason that we think this would be helpful for you is that it would give you a sense of what are the parameters that we think we could conceivably be successful with the community. And I think that is very helpful for us in our conversation. So Sal, in these pieces that you've seen before, can you characterize anything else that you think the board would want to know about these surveys?
No, I think they're very proud of their statistical significance and how close they are to election day. And when they are not, there usually is an outlying instance. So.
And I have more questions, but on a different topic, so I'm happy to let someone else have a turn or.
Anybody else have a question or comment? No comment? No? Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna actually ask Sal while you're up there. So this hybrid idea of, half old high school, half new high school. I was just wondering if you could speak on that idea. Maybe give examples of what you've done in the past, what you would
Sure.
recommend for us. How do the different pieces actually fit together? How does the building of the school work when classes are still in session? That sort of thing. Anything you can tell us.
Sure. So what I was asked to look into further pricing was I would say a reimagining of all of the academic wings. So that would be I'm looking at a list here. So that'd be the M, S, D, and H wings. And so I would say the most natural path would be to start with building a new addition that you would then occupy when it is ready, and then you would demolish the parts of the building that are no longer needed. You could do that in phases if you wanted. So you could build half of a classroom wing, move people over, demo as needed, and then do some more construction where you had some demolition as well, because that's one of the things we've been thinking about. We could build one big new classroom tower, but if you wanted to have two for a little bit of balance or on either side of the media center, that's one thing that Kaylin and I pondered. But I think it's generally in phases. So you would build an addition, you would move people over into the addition and then demolish and do any kind of stitching or connective work. And the addition, the scale of addition you're talking about is probably in, I don't know, Cole, what do you think, 18 to 24 month construction? Yeah, there might be parts of it that are occupiable sooner than others. But in general, it'd be a large addition. And that could or could not be the same location as like the field house and the music, right? So you could choose to do one large location in one spot. You could choose to be doing additions in different parts of the building. Really what matters at this time is setting aside the right amount of square footage. And then during the design process, you can decide exactly what should go where. But I would say that would be the most natural path. That's very similar to the project we are doing in North St. Paul right now at Tartan High School. So we are building a new classroom tower at Tartan High School, a new 3-story to try to get a little bit of land back. And then when that opens, we will be demolishing the existing classroom tower. So I think that'd be the most natural path. Certainly you could try to build additions that worked around your existing footprint a little bit more, but I think the question is always would you end up with a compromised end solution? Right, because you'd have to be trying to build around courtyards or build around links and things of that nature. So to me, that would mean that the academic heart of the building would swing a little bit south, right? Because right now you've got all of the classrooms around to the fanning around the media center. And the most natural location would be to build either to the east, kind of near the main entry, or to the south, where I'm sure many of you are thinking about the field house. So it would kind of move the center of gravity of the building, but I think that would certainly have some positive effects too.
And I have to ask this question.
Yes,
How safe is it for the students when the construction's going on?
it would be very safe. Knutson does a great job of making it a school first and a construction site second. So.
And Amy, I just want you to know that I have worked and lived through 2 construction projects, just like what Sal described, constructing new square footage, moving people into a new part of the building and then doing some demolition. And I agree, there's some really quality ways that people can, it will be safe. We would not allow it if it wasn't. So the construction companies are very used to doing this. They have alternate pathways that people use for periods of time. They're very good at communicating. And with our partnership with Knutson, I would have complete faith that it would be safe for everyone.
And sometimes projects like this are in 3 or 4 phases. I made it sound simple, like it'd be 1 or 2 phases, but it could be that 3 or 4 phases of occupancy is the right thing to do. But really what got you the best end product, I think, would drive phasing. I will say, I think projects such as that are often more attractive to contractors, as opposed to bringing contractors back for 3 summers in a row and only giving them 3 months at a time. When they can have a part of a building that they can come and work on continuously for 18 to 24 months, is much more advantageous for like labor and workforce and things of that nature. So otherwise they have to find other projects to balance their work around for the other, 8 to 9 months. So I would guess that you could probably see a little bit better pricing. And I think it might be more attractive to some other bidders. I don't know if Cole would agree with that, but I think in general. Yes.
Thank you. Tom.
Stay there. Students have just endured 2 years of COVID, so probably the last thing they want is 3 or 4 years of construction. So anything that can make that go faster. The other concern is parking and how all that would fit in such that if you build new stuff to the south and tore down the old stuff, and that could be the parking lot or whatever, but even during construction, where would like things like parking, bus routing and stuff like that. I mean, that's all once we figure out what we want to do and whatnot, but just to keep those in mind in the whole process and the costs involved with implementing that.
Sometimes in a project such as this, one of the first phases is actually to build a new parking lot in its final resting place. And that might drive some of the parking to not be where the existing academic went. You might fill that out with more parking, but for example, you might want to take over a field and add some parking for during construction. That will be final parking, but that might be an early phase to help live through the loss of some parking.
Yeah, well, and the other thing, given we got 3 schools and 1 intersection, and we just did a lot of work with the roundabout, is just the way of getting buses in and out for considering the final plan and also where, I mean, that may dictate or influence where the new academic spaces could be, just to allow all that to work.
Absolutely.
Julie?
So Sal, you can stay there also. So I'm trying to determine in my mind if we look at renovate, which let's set aside the $20 million athletic facility and we just look at the educational needs. So if we look at renovate, we're at 60 million. If we look at reimagine, we're at 80 million. So what are we getting for an additional $20 million? What other educational needs are we addressing beyond what has been identified and seemingly addressed in our renovate plan at 60 million?
Sure. So I can speak to that. I think it was discussed at the last meeting that the option you had been discussing was kind of I would call them surgical interventions for flexible learning areas. So I would say with the opportunity to start fresh, you could really transform your learning environment in a much more significant way. So you're calling it option 1 or path 1.
The pathway 1 is what we had been talking about.
Correct.
Pathway 2 would be the new construction with the existing building.
Sure. So in pathway 1, the goal would be to try to find high impact areas throughout the existing building to create flexible learning areas, but not a lot of change in the existing classrooms beyond furniture and the mechanical systems, for example. I think in option 2, obviously you could completely reimagine that, and you might even question if you have lots of 900 square foot classrooms that hold 30 or 32 students, right? You might envision a totally different paradigm. Trying to think of what other would be the tangible difference. The one major tangible difference between the two would be, I would say, the experience rate when you walk in the front of the building. That kitchen cafeteria commons experience is quite different between those two. So in the pricing that you see for pathway 2, we did include a new student commons that would be a part of the addition at the main entry, and then allowing the kitchen to enlarge in place and actually take over some of the cafeteria. So I think that is a major difference between the two. Storm shelter, yes. When you are renovating, you do not have to, and you're not adding occupants, you don't have to, especially if we set aside the field house. I think if you do a field house, you'll have to do it, but if we're not thinking about that, yes, you will have to have an allocation of space that will be designed to an F4 tornado, which is no small cost. I think it's a little bit under $2 million has been estimated for the size of storm shelter that you need. That was a great one.
I think also, Julie, I would say one of the differences would be natural light, right? So
Sure,
even in
that's
the
a great one.
renovation, we could increase the natural light into the facility. There's no question about that. In fact, you'd replace, rather than just replacing the skinny windows, you'd replace the entire window envelope in those rooms. But clearly with today's glass technology, just think about Greenville Park, the new Greenville Park building, versus even Bridgewater, and just the amount of natural light that we are able to bring into a facility without sacrificing efficiency. So I think that would be another major difference.
That made me think of a few others. So I would say renovation is very difficult to increase volume of space. It's very costly to raise roofs, whereas when you're starting from scratch, those things could be set. And then probably shouldn't gloss over the fact that a one-story high school is relatively rare, not unheard of, but it is land intensive. And so if you were to do the pathway to, I think you would probably want to do a 2 or 3 story model that would help free up additional land for parking and fields that would actually be taken up by some of the athletic components, again, if those were included. So I think the ability to have some site efficiency might be a benefit of that as well.
Just one last question. How about energy efficiency? Where would we see potential cost savings? Energy as
All of that is cooled today of the academic areas. Certainly the R value of the walls and the roof would be higher than what they are today. So I think you would see some reduced bills in that regard. And the systems that they put in 2002 are less efficient than the systems put in today, although marginally a couple of %. So I think you could see energy efficiency. Yes. One of the questions I always have people remember though is oftentimes you're going to be larger than you were, or you might have an expansion, especially if you're doing the field house, and that's more space to heat, cool, light, etc. So a new facility is not always a cost savings if you added square footage, or if you took a building that didn't have cooling before and added cooling. That sometimes surprises people, but obviously paying to cool adds money. So more cleaning too could be if a building is bigger, but
would we consider anything like geothermal?
I think you definitely could consider geothermal. Yep. You would want to do a test well and see if your site is viable for it. There's some great technology today called Darcy well, where you can actually get the same tonnage of cooling out of 1 or 2 wells, for example, for an elementary school instead of a well field of 60 or 80. So we actually just bid that out, the new elementary school in Lakeville.
Thank you, Sal. Okay. Okay. Okay, Amy.
I just had one thing I think we can add to the list, better hallway flow. Because right now our hallways are very
Sure.
crowded.
And I think obviously with starting afresh, just general organization and wayfinding, that you would have the opportunity to start over from that as opposed to kind of trying to fix what you have.
Thank you, Sal.
That's a good one. Yep.
Being at Carleton, where they just built a new science center and remodeled, our energy savings, I forget the numbers, was substantial.
Sure.
Even though we got more square footage. But between the LED lighting and just better HVAC and everything, the energy savings was considerable. And the campus now, the entire campus is powered by geothermal.
Sure.
So and the main field is in the bald spot, which is like the area of half of a football field.
Mhm.
So it can be done.
And I think pathway 1 will increase your energy efficiency as well because of the envelope work and the windows, but probably not as much as a new facility. So just want to draw that distinction.
Thank you, Sal.
There'll be less area of roof over time. So re-roofing in the future, I think, would be less costly when you trying to think of other things.
From a security standpoint, how would you view the 2 different approaches?
I don't know that they're materially different. I'd be open to anyone else's opinion about that, but I think anything you can do in a new building, you could implement in your existing building. Your building is actually pretty easy to zone off. You've got a secure entry, camera coverage. I don't know that would be materially different because you need just as many cameras on levels as you would on a single story building. Obviously you would reduce the number of, or you could reduce the number of exterior doors which many people take comfort in, but in a high school, you will have many exterior doors. There's just a certain number required for fire code exiting, but I don't know that I would see them as that. I don't see that as a driver.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that, remember that when it comes to security, the most important thing that we have are quality relationships with students. That's going to be the case regardless of the facility. And then, of course, with some of the more modern recommendations in the last few years about secure facilities, the concept of the lockdown is really going away in a lot of ways, that if you are able to exit the building, if an intruder is on a different side of the facility, the existing building, because it has so many exits, which also create a liability, but it also could help potentially get people out very quickly in the worst case scenario. So I agree. I think that if you're building something from a new, you do have the ability to segment the building a little bit more, to do some additional automatic closing door, things like that, that would help cordon off some of the facility. You would still have in a multi-story building, you'd still have easy access to get out of the building. You'd have to use stairwells, of course, for most students, elevators and things like that for students who have mobility issues. So I think there are strengths to both areas.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Okay. Martina?
This isn't for Sal, though. It's for Dr. Hillman. How do you see the upcoming election affecting this process that we're going through right now?
So can you please tell me more?
Well, we might have 3 different board members in January. So it seems like in one sense, there's some urgency to make decisions now, because we are the ones who have been looking at this and working on this and not having to fill in new board members. But then there's also, the election comes if we have, let's say we decide we want to wait a year to do a building bond referendum, then we could possibly have 3 new board members. So that could affect the whole conversation as well. So just wondering what you're thinking about that.
Yes, so I think that is a reality. We live in a democratic society where we have elections. And when we have elections, those elections can have consequences, and they can have give new direction about solving an issue. So yes, that certainly could have an impact in a variety of different ways. I think that the statewide elections could also have an impact in terms of what kind of additional funding, what kind of additional support do we have for these kinds of initiatives, which has happened. We didn't even get a bonding bill this last time around, right? So the election could have a number of different outcomes. What I would suggest is that I would be very careful to leverage that as a reason to do something or not to do something. Right now, you are the elected officials representing this community. And as such, you are charged, with the governance of that. Could that opinion in that direction change? Of course it can. We live in a democratic society. But I think that we should focus, my sense would be we should focus on the merits of the planning process. And if we include and involve people from the community like we have to this point, further so by asking the people to participate in surveys and give us their questions, our hope would be that we're able to come up with something that would be supported by the majority of the community. And then maybe that election might not have as a significant of an impact on the direction. I understand the question. I think it's valid, and I think you're wise to ask it. I think the question is that I think we should keep the eye on the ball of what is the right thing to do and when is the timing to go for it. Because it is clear to me from our discussions, as hard as we worked, we don't have a singular approach that you can all get behind. And what we know is that dissent is important, but when it comes to this kind of question coming before the voters, the data tells us that if the elected representatives of the community are unified, there's a very good chance that it will pass in the community because you are representatives of the community. So we want to make sure that we take the time to have something. We don't have to have complete consensus, but I'd prefer to have that level of consensus because you almost always get there. And it's okay that we're not there yet because these are tough questions. It is a dilemma that we are trying to solve. So my sense is we're wise to think about that. It's a good question to put on the table. And at the same time, I think my recommendation would be to keep going forward with thinking about what is the best plan and then what is the timing for it. Understand that that could change.
Julie?
So I have a question about the process if we, that we have talked about for pathway number 3. And one of the aspects of that would be the community feedback proposal to solicit questions about the proposed project. So what would we envision? Would we have visuals for the community? I know in 17, we have never moved forward with an actual visual of what a high school would look like. We talked conceptual. So what would be your vision in terms of the information we would provide the community in order to give us that feedback of, a pathway 1 or the reimagine versus the renovate?
So yes, in fact, if she's willing to come up to the dais, we've talked about this. Let's just say that the technology has changed dramatically between 2017 and now in terms of what we are able to show people. So there are a couple of different ways that we could look at doing things. There's the bird's eye view, right? Which you'd be able to give a more bird's eye view. Then there's also the more graphical renderings that can be done, which you've seen from the Greenville Park project. So Sal, could you just talk about how you present, those kinds of options to people and how far you would suggest? There is a danger to that too, because what you don't want to do is you don't want the community to see a picture. Oh, I want that. And it may look just a little bit different, right, than it was on the image. And so we want to be very thoughtful, very clear. But Sal and I have talked about this quite extensively about the kinds of graphics and graphical representations that could be shared with it. There's a variety of things we could do, but I want her to share the options.
Yeah, I think in general, you have to remember that referendum graphics have a goal, which is to help people understand what they're voting for. And I think in general, graphics that show scope and need more than how glassy it is or what color it is can be helpful. I do find that, beautiful renderings, which are very possible, as Dr. Hillman has indicated, make your people who are already yes voters excited, but they don't do much to sway a no vote. And you have to question if they do they actually turn a maybe to a yes? And so there are risks in publishing graphics ahead of a referendum. I would say if a referendum would be successful, that we would work on the design of the project for a year. And that would be with your stakeholders getting all of the relationships right and the aesthetics right and the educational philosophy right. And so what we do advance of a referendum is really devoid of that process. And one would question if it's actually whatever we come up with, is that actually the right thing for Northfield? I would actually venture to say, is it a little bit different? I would be shocked if we can guess at what your stakeholders would want to see. And most districts don't want to go through the time and expense of doing all of that before a referendum either, because it can be presumptuous and expensive. So I think striking that right balance of making sure people understand what they're getting out of it without committing to a color palette or an exact architectural style or what have you, is really what it's all about, as they can backfire on you because people can say that looks too fancy, that looks too glamorous, I don't even like that color, right? Can get as subjective as that. So every choice you make with graphics, I think, can have pros and cons. So I've seen some success with, I call them bird's eye view, or things that don't commit to the color of the doors and the color of the carpet, but still help people understand, oh, there would be 9 science labs and there would be 4 courts in the gym. And so a lot of that can be done with some simpler graphics and text, but if it was the district's choice, we're perfectly capable of doing, full architectural renderings as if the design was complete. They just have very different goals. So.
Thank you.
To follow up on that, I guess I wouldn't even need to know that there are going to be 9 science rooms and what they're going to look like. But given our limited space or the space,
A site
constraints,
plan can be very
yeah,
helpful.
A site plan, right? Especially and if there's a field house and hockey rink and parking and transportation and all that, just to get a conceptual understanding would help. Thanks.
Yeah, sometimes I call that type of drawing a proof of concept, right? It might not be this exact shape, but we know that amount of space and the amount of parking required fits on this campus. Yep. Another great example.
Thank you. Any more comments or questions? Julie?
So if we shift gears and talk about a special election in February of 2023, we readily acknowledge the effort that requires for the district to administer an election. What is the approximate cost of the district administering that election? Do you have any idea?
So the last time that we ran our own election, I recall it approximately $40,000
Thank you.
roughly.
Tom, question?
Aren't there often or occasional elections like citywide in April? It seems like that's another sort of big day or big election time.
So I don't, I'd have to think about that. Typically, what you would see are elections, the other citywide kinds of elections tend to be in August now. They would have been the old primaries from September, but they're now typically done in August. I don't recall recently any April elections for local citywide kinds of issues. So we would not be able to, you could potentially piggyback off of something in August but probably not next year unless you had in 2023, there wouldn't be any statewide elections. There typically would not be citywide elections unless there was a special seat to be filled. Sometimes there's a soil and conservation officer kind of election that has to happen, but it would most likely, I think the odds of having any kind of election of August 2023, other than a school district, would be slim.
Good question. Okay, Julie?
So the only potential would be there is a current city council member running for a state seat. So I'm not sure if they would be able to appoint someone or if they would do a special election that we could.
That's a great
Dovetail.
question, and I don't know the details on.
That's the only thing I'm thinking, because we were part of the 2017 city
Correct.
special election, so that did not cost us any money.
Can comment?
Well, I think that city council member's term is up anyway, so I don't think there'd be a special election next year.
Good point.
In terms of February, do we have any statistics about voter turnout and how that might compare to some of the other 5 or 4 month options?
I don't have that for you this evening, but we can certainly get that data from some of our partners.
And then August next week, we have 15 school districts going out for bond referendum. Will we use that to inform how we feel about this? Obviously, the survey of our voters matters probably the most, but do we look at other initiatives, particularly in this time of year, given the volatility in the economy?
Yeah, I think we can always learn something from other school districts elections. I would caution, the board to make that lay that over on our situation. So many bond questions are very local, right? It depends upon what is being proposed for update. It depends upon the other tax burden that people might have in that community. It could be a number of things. This is the old example that all elections are local, right? And so I think we certainly can learn some broader picture things. I would be very cautious about overlaying that on top of our circumstance, though, of course, we do study those things, we do learn, and we do try to hear how that has gone in other communities.
And then just to follow up to Amy's question about the number of voters. In 2020 at 7 a.m. on voting day, we had 19,298 people registered. People registered, so maybe a few more showed up.
Thank you. Percent? Yep, the percent.
I mean, you have to remember that includes Dundas and the townships and not just Northfield.
Yeah, so that's not the general population. That's the number of people who are registered to vote.
I'm guessing it's a pretty high number for our area.
Any other questions, comments? I had a question about the process with the capital projects levy. Does it also, is it under pressure to go to MDE and be approved and all that?
So I'm gonna look to Val, that doesn't, a capital projects levy doesn't require the review and comment. So it does not have the same level of burden that it would for a bond project.
So when would you need to hear from the board on that particular item?
So the election timeline is the exact same. So we would have to take action no later than August 26th. If the board gives us the direction, if you will, that you would like us to bring something back, we could get some pieces ready for next Monday to give you some more details. We would then continue, we would start talking about it with the community. We would then work with our council to get the election questions written properly and have you do that formal approval at the second meeting in August. So we would start telling people that this is the approach that we're going to use, and we would wrap up all of those specific items by the second meeting in August, for sure. And if possible, if we needed to, we might ask you to have a special meeting simply to approve the ballot language, should that be a way that you'd like us to go.
Okay, thank you.
May I ask,
Yeah.
I intentionally did not put anything, on for an individual because I don't need you to take individual action if you're not asking us to put something on the ballot, but I just would like to hear from board members if they're willing to share where they might be at in terms of is the continuing the planning, that approach, something that you're open to? Does that seem like it resonates with you? I'm just curious to see I'm hearing people, what I'm perceiving is that people are, they are okay with pathway number 3 at this point for a variety of different reasons, but I'm just curious to hear, where people are at, just so we would have a little bit of direction around that pathway.
So I'm in my 6th year on the board, and I've been thinking about this decision a lot and thinking this may be the most important decision I make my whole time on the board, because it really does affect not only 30 years of students at the high school, but also possibly the economic development of our city. Because if we're hoping for high-tech companies to locate in our area, even though we have a great academic reputation, our high school itself is only sort of average looking. And as people come to shop around the different towns and see what amenities there are and whether they'd want to invite their employees to come live in Northfield. And I wonder how important the high school is to that process and how important it is to have a high school that has a little more sex appeal to it, or curb appeal, whatever the right word would be. So I'm thinking about that a lot. And I know there's also the, financial constraints. And I've also been feeling just the last week or so that I thought we did hurry the process a bit, but I think we all had good intentions of voting in November because we wanted to hit the big election and we wanted to save our own school district money. But I didn't think we had really taken the time to really discuss all the options. And I really love the idea of the voter survey and being able to take the pulse of the community with the voter survey. So all of this is to say that I am definitely on board with the third option of considering a capital levy referendum for this year, an amount to be determined. And then to continue planning and being very thoughtful about this decision because I want to get it right.
Rainey. Okay, Tom.
And I'll second Amy's comments for the same reason, and also the complications of the field house and ice rink potential, and the impact on the community. I also find it ironic that Rice County recently voted to build a new jail, and they have all the same constraints in front of them of the tax impact and the economy, price of gas, whatever. And they could have voted no, could have waited, but they didn't. They voted for it, saw the need, and did what they thought was best. And they can do that, and we can't. And here we are, in a situation where our high school is, as my kids have often said, kind of a laughing stock and everything else. But so clearly we need to do something with the high school. And I agree, there's been a lot of conversation about it and opinions expressed. But I agree with Amy. I think the prudent thing to do is to as Matt said, put the brakes on and think about it. Maybe less so the school part, because I think maybe we're coming to some consensus on that, maybe not, but the other components, because if you have the $80 million high school and then the $20 million field house and the $20 million ice rink and all that, and all that could make or break a community. I think just slowing down and being more deliberate would be the right way to go. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. No?
I would support what Amy said. You said it so well, and I can't enhance anything she said. One thing I do want to share with you, I have conversations with a fair number of realtors. Most, when I ask the question, what brought your client to town, most of them will say the community's education. And it wouldn't necessarily mean the public schools, but it might also mean the colleges. But Northfield has got a reputation of extremely high caliber education, particularly in, and I say, including the public schools. And that's what brings people to town more than probably anything else.
Thank you, Noel. Julie?
So I am supportive of the pathway 3. I think for a lot of reasons, it's a good idea to continue to take some time. I think that the stratified sample survey of district voters makes a lot of sense, as well as some other plans that were outlined. And I would be very supportive of going in November of 2022 with a $1.5 million capital projects levy. I think that since we first had that capital projects levy on the ballot in 2006, our voters have stepped up every time. And I think that we could be cautiously optimistic that they would do the same in 2022, November.
Thank you, Julie. Right.
I'm in agreement with the others in supporting pathway 3 and taking a little more time to assess our needs and how best to strategically approach it. I also support the capital levy and think we should go ahead and at minimum 1.5 million and maybe discuss that at the next meeting about the other options and how that might impact the possibilities we could do with that money.
Yeah, I just added a lot more information as far as, what we're looking at. I think that really, I think it's very important to survey the people, especially the taxpayers, really get a good pulse of, what the taxpayers want to do. It's pretty easy to vote for something, but if you're not paying for it, you don't have any skin in the game. So hopefully out of a survey, we can again get some more data and analyze that and make a better decision.
Thank you, Jeff. Oh, I'm sorry, no.
I support pathway 3
Thank you.
for a lot of reasons. And I must say, I'm overwhelmed with the opportunities that we have, but pathway 3 seems to be the most logical.
And I wouldn't necessarily add anything new. I also support pumping the brakes, not putting on the brakes, pumping. So we're still going to be working on it. We're giving ourselves more time. We're still a little bit under pressure because an election in February still has its deadlines, coming up. But certainly it'll give us time to survey and to ask for feedback. And I think that would really help us feel at peace with the decision that we make. So thank you for bringing that to us.
So what we will do next is we will start working on the technical nature of the capital projects levy. We already have, as you might imagine, we've got some of that done already. So we'll be able to get those things for you. We'll bring something to you during our regular meeting next Monday night. We will be working with Morris Leatherman yet this week to start the next step in the process. That survey does take about 6 weeks. So that's, I mean, that's why it's so time intensive, is that it's going to take at least 6 weeks. We'll continue those processes moving forward with that. And then we will continue to help you come to consensus on what you're thinking from at least the academic perspective, right? In terms of, we'll continue to work. We'll also start to work with some partnerships, more so across the community for some additional potential around the athletics question. That's something that we did not talk about a ton tonight, because you have clearly prioritized the academic component of this and the infrastructure component. There is some opportunity to potentially bring together again some private investment and some other governmental agencies to look at a broader, a more grand bargain when it comes to that kind of thing. So we'll continue to work on this. This is not, I like the pump the brakes part, right? Because that's what we're going to just slow this down a little bit, get some additional information, and we'll get started on the capital projects levy, language and timeline and all of those components that you'll need to pass.
Thank you. Tom?
Well, I'm thinking of it, and it's it's related. There were a lot of questions about the turf, the $2 million turf, the concerns about bacteria growing in it, all kinds of questions. If we could get more information on that and why, an explanation of why we're even considering it, that would be helpful. I think a lot of people have that question.
Yeah, so we'll certainly get you all the detail. I know that in approximately 2017 or so, there were some real questions in some other elections across the state about the safety of turf and especially the crumb rubber that is part of that. There's been quite a bit of additional studies since then. We can get you all that information, but to be very clear why we would even consider turf, it's very simple. It's about access. And so in Minnesota, a grass field needs to be taken care of. And the beautiful grass fields that we have take a lot of maintenance, and they are still limited to be used. If you have a turf facility, it would be much more accessible for a variety of different athletics and physical education outside. You really expand the months that you can use it. So that's the clear why, Tom, why you would do it.
Right. Well, thank you everyone for thoughtful comments and excellent questions as usual. Amy, you have another comment? Great. Is there a second? Okay, a second by Corey. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed. Okay, motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you.